I'm Ed Feigenbaum, and I'd like to welcome you to the Computer History Museum. There are quite a few people here tonight who haven't been to the museum before. And to those people, the museum offers a special welcome. The Computer History Museum is the best museum in the world for the history of information technology and the information revolution. It is more than just a museum of past achievements. It strives to be a vibrant venue for discussing the present and future of the information revolution. Tonight's discussion between Dr. Dan Clancy of Google Books and John Holler, the CEO of the Computer History Museum, is one of these events. Proudly, I'm a trustee of the museum and a volunteer. Tonight, I'm here as a volunteer who helped to organize this event. I have been asked by the museum to introduce the topic and the discussants. Last March 1st, the Computer History Museum, right in this room, hosted a symposium organized by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences on the future of the book. Both Dan Clancy and John Holler were panelists at that symposium. It was a richly informative 2-hour event. It can be streamed from the Computer History Museum YouTube channel, and I urge you to watch it. Tonight, we drill down deeper into one of the topics, Google's project to, as Google says, organize the world's knowledge by scanning, digitizing, and indexing many millions of books and making the results available in a variety of forms on Google. Dan Clancy is the engineering director for Google Book Search. He has been at the center of the digital book revolution and the currents of lawsuits and controversy that the Google Books project has given rise to, as the various stakeholders in the world of books responded, some like me with awe, and some with fear of the digital future. Dan Clancy came to Google in 2005 from NASA Ames Research Center, where he was director of exploration technologies for both the robotic and human exploration of space. He received his PhD in the artificial intelligence field at the University of Texas at Austin. We in the AI community are proud of his accomplishments and leadership. John Holler is the CEO of the museum. He has done a superb job of envisioning the future of the museum and leading us toward that future. More to the point of this evening's discussion, however, he came to us from a job as a senior executive at Pearson plc in London. Pearson, the world's largest textbook publisher, has many sub-companies, including, for example, Penguin Books, Addison Wesley, the Financial Times, The Economist. John started 2 Pearson companies in the business of multi-platform content. Before Pearson, he was the executive vice president of PBS, Public Broadcasting Service, responsible for most of the techie things that went on at PBS, including being the founding father of the now famous PBS.org. So John is a book guy and a media content guy. Impressively, he also has a law degree from Harvard Law School. Each of you has been given a question card and a pencil since we expect a vigorous Q&A session. Please use the card for your question. A museum staff member will come through to collect them a little later in the program. Now let me push on with my introduction of the topic. For millennia, much of mankind has transmitted its culture to future generations using the written word. In the 550 years since Gutenberg, printing innovations have accelerated the process immensely, so that now the surfeit of words and images, ink on paper, have become a curse as well as a blessing. It is said that more than 200 years ago, Diderot remarked that it was easier to reinvent an idea than to find it in the printed literature. All of us, each with his or her own contribution to information technology, can be proud that projects of our generation, like Google Book Search and the Million Books Project, will have solved that problem and will have used technology to enrich human culture like no other generation since Gutenberg's. So maybe we are the greatest generation. Forget abstractions. Let me give you a concrete and personal example. In the past, some of you may have heard me say that one order of magnitude change signals a revolution in human activity. Driving your car is about one order of magnitude faster than walking. Jet airplanes carrying you across the continent are one order of magnitude faster than driving your car. How to think about it is this. Would anyone in Washington, D.C. ask you to attend a meeting there if it took you several days to get there by car? My Stanford colleague, Nils Nilsson, has been writing a history of artificial intelligence. Several months ago, Nils asked me for a reference to the first published paper in which I used a particular phrase, a certain piece of terminology, for the introduction of which I am known in the AI community. In my memory, I may have used one of two forms of that terminology, and here are the two. One is called the knowledge is power hypothesis, and the other is in the knowledge lies the power, both of which, of course, are adapted from Francis Bacon's knowledge is power. If all of my materials were searchable using a modern search engine, I would have the answer for Nils in seconds. And in fact, Nils wouldn't need me to help. But the answer still has not been found because of the tedium of the search and the chaos and difficulty of obtaining the materials. For example, the search led to the proceedings of the 1968 IFIP Congress. Those of you who are old enough know that IFIP is the International Federation of Information Processing Societies. Long dead. Now, I didn't have that proceedings volume. The Stanford Library did not have it. Interlibrary Loan finally found it at UCLA. And 2 weeks later, we had the volume. But there, our luck ran out. The terminology was not there. So we wasted our time. Our search can have an end, but the cost of getting to that end has not been worth it. We have consumed, I estimate, 4 or 5 orders of magnitude more time than it would have taken the search engine to find it if a digitized version of my archives were available online and on Google. And still, we have not found that terminology in the analog world, in spite of the 4 or 5 orders of magnitude. What is being discussed tonight is not your ordinary kind of revolution, like cars and jets. It is a super revolution, like writing and printing and computers. So let's hear about the digital world of books and book search from Dan and John.
See, I'm supposed to be there.
Yeah, great.
Don't want to mess that one up.
Thanks very much, Ed, for that great stage-setting introduction. Thank you, Dan, for being here tonight, and thanks to all of you for being here. Okay, so there's a famous software company here in the Valley that likes to attack problems by focusing on the two things. One it calls the what, and the next one it calls the how. So let's talk about the what to lead this off tonight. And the what is really Google's vision for digital books and the things that you're working on. Talk about that for a little bit.
All right, and first let me I also want to thank Ed for the introduction and everybody here for coming. You know, I think this is an important topic, and I'm really excited to see everyone here. And, you know, again, please ask the questions that you want, because the whole point of this is to get into a discussion. And let me ask a quick question so I can get a sense. How many people in the audience have used Google Book Search? Okay, so that's what I figured. But so I'm going to give the vision and kind of how we've gotten to here fairly quickly.
Good.
Because I think most people have a sense of this. So we can get on to some of the more current issues. But when we started this, it was really driven from a deep belief in that Larry and Sergey really had about how both the internet and full-text search had revolutionized the manner in which we interact with information. And it had really led to the democratization of information, much like the printing press led to a different revolution because it made information broadly accessible. And in fact, the internet had gone one step further. And of course, as everyone in this audience knows, a huge component of the internet's power, what was discovered over time, was really due to full-text search. And now we can type in words and find things that you just can't imagine having found. In fact, I was watching a movie that was, you know, it was set in the 70s, and they were trying to do something, and they were calling, and they didn't know information, and it sort of struck me, wow, what a world to live in. And of course, I lived in that world back in the 80s, but I've kind of blithely forgotten about the world that I used to live in, because we just take it all for granted. Now, of course, as we all know, and as Ed's story so eloquently describes, a vast amount of the literature, the culture, the history of our world actually is not digitally accessible, because up until a fairly short time ago, this was often recorded in books. And of course, newspapers and magazines and other types of content. And that, in fact, while certainly some books were digitally available, many weren't, even current books. And so the revolution of full-text search wasn't there. And in fact, you know, I was talking to some recent graduates at Google, and I was talking about how I used to, you know, and I often talk about this when we talk about the settlement, how back in early 1980s when I was an undergrad, you know, my stories of going in the library and walking up and, you know, coming back with a stack of books, and I'd go downstairs and I'd figure out which ones I actually wanted, and I'd photocopy some and I'd check out some, and from looking around this room, most people seem about the same generation as me, so we all know this. And of course, that's the same thing kids do today if they actually want to access those books. Now, the other reality that we have is, in fact, I was giving a talk to a bunch of undergrads, and I asked them, how many of you have stepped inside a library in the last year? And these were top undergrads from Stanford and MIT and Carnegie Mellon, et cetera, et cetera. There are people doing interns in the Valley, and only about half of them raised their hands. And I think it's fair to say that if I ask this audience, how many people stepped inside a library their freshman year of being an undergraduate, I suspect every single hand almost would be raised. And that's because we've become used to this. And so Book Search was really, after this, it was addressing this, because Larry and Sergey firmly believed about the importance of making all this content digitally accessible. So, and one thing that they like to do is say, what are some problems that if we didn't do it, might not otherwise happen? And so this was one of those that prior to it, many people would have thought, you know, the folks at Michigan, you know, they kind of had, I think they were one of the leaders in digitization, and they had done 10,000 books the year before in the whole year. So that's really where it came from. And to give a quick kind of summary of where we are now, and then we can get on to some of the other questions. So far, we've scanned over 10 million books. Books fall into three categories. We get books from publishers, I think as everyone's aware, and there we get permission to show what's usually up to 20% of the book. called a preview, and then we link to places where they can access the book, whether it's a bookstore or a library. And publishers give us their books because they believe in the importance of the full text search and the integration into the web. Public domain, where we basically have over 1.5 million what we call partner program books. We have over 1.5 million public domain books in the United States. And for a public domain book, we let people browse the entire content. They can download a PDF, full access. We now provide access through other channels too, Sony, Barnes & Noble, and we try to broadly distribute them. And then in copyright, where we do not have permission, and some of these may be public domain, but we don't know for sure, and those we only show 3 snippets. Okay, and it's, for anyone who used it, it looks like someone ripped the pages. We actually didn't rip the pages. And that's all you can see, including links to acquire the book through a library or purchase it. And of course, that was the source of the lawsuit. And today, one thing we've seen, we've really seen this idea that integration into the web, because our core value proposition has been targeted at people that just go to Google, type in a query. As opposed to someone saying, I want a book. What they're saying is, I want information, okay? And a book is just one source where that information might be. And so that's what we've always said this should be. It shouldn't be web, books, it should just all be blended. And what we've seen is, for publishers, they have consisted of a number of studies where they've shown that, especially their backlist, which is, look, full text search doesn't cause Twilight to sell more. That sells for other reasons. But for most of these books they have in their backlist, they've seen that by being in Google Book Search, these books, their sales go up. They've done studies to see that this serendipitous discovery really works for them. And then for our public domain books, we've seen a vast amount of usage. One of the statistics from about a year ago, the numbers have changed a little, but a year ago the statistic was that over half of the public domain books, every month somebody looked at least 30 pages. Not 30 pages, 10 pages, sorry. At least 10 pages were viewed of over half the books that were public domain every month. For the partner program, it was over 80%, okay? And the stunning thing about that statistic is many of these books hadn't been accessed for years. In Oxford, we in fact know that nobody had read them because they'd never even cut the pages. And so it really is, and you'd find, I have countless stories that people tell me, that we get people writing in about somebody whose grandfather was in World War I. He never knew what he did in World War I, but by searching on his name, he found out the infantry he was in, and this whole book about what the infantry did, called the Yankee Division. People who find out about their grandfathers, people who discover books on concrete fountain molds that they say, oh, this was just what I was looking for. And it's a 1906 book. So I really think the idea that there's untapped potential in this content, and the key, going to what kind of Ed was talking about, of realizing that untapped potential is really making it easy for people to discover and then access them. Mm-hmm. So there's the quick summary of kind of why we started this and where we are.
And the vision.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yep.
All right, so let's go back to 2004. Google has an agreement with the University of Michigan to start digitizing a vast amount of the library collection. Mm-hmm. A lawsuit is filed in New York for the reasons you described, largely revolving around copyright. There's a negotiation that ensues. 3 years go by, right? It takes 3 years to negotiate the settlement agreement that we're going to be talking about tonight. Now, for those of you who don't know the details of the settlement agreement, it's 385 pages. It has 46 sections of definitions. It's got 15 sections on Google's obligations. It's got 9 sections on the economic terms. It's got 6 sections on libraries' obligations. So this is not a little 3 or 4 page memorandum of understanding that we're talking about here. This is a very heavily negotiated agreement. It's online. By the way, there's a site called thepublicindex.org. If you wanted to go and look it up, you can look at the entire thing plus some related information. So now here we are. This is the thing that everybody around the country who's interested in the subject is beginning to discuss. So talk a little bit about the settlement agreement and what it provides.
Yeah. So prior to the agreement, when in fact it was the authors that came up with the idea of the settlement agreement, there were 2 lawsuits. One was from the publishers and one was from a class action from the authors. And from the publishers, there were 5 publishers that were suing us. In fact, I think Pearson
was one of them.
Was one of them. And although all 5 of the publishers that were suing us were also our partners at the same time.
Funny how that works.
Huh? Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, it's important to know because some of this was, and the reason it's important to understand this as we get to the resolution was that some of the conflict wasn't necessarily out that our interests weren't aligned. It was really the publishers felt under principle that what we were doing wasn't allowed. And we had a disagreement over what fair use was allowed in the United States. And in fact, we index stuff every day on the web. And the authors was a class action lawsuit. And so prior to the settlement, the world we were going to end up in, and when you go to, you talk about the vision, was I always thought it would be great to have this world where you really could access all these books. But the reality was that even if we went forward with the settlement and won, what that would mean is what is today what we're doing, the status quo, where 60 to 70% of the books we've scanned are in this snippet view. Okay, and winning the lawsuit wouldn't have unlocked those books. It just would have said, yes, you can scan and index and show snippets. And so the interesting thing that for me got me very excited about the possibility was this idea that under the settlement we can find a solution that benefited users, because my belief is users actually would want to not just see 3 snippets, but actually be able to access the content. Work for the authors and publishers, because in fact what they came and said was, they wanted to find a way that Google could build a platform where rights holders could get compensated, if they want, from basically creating a platform by which they could distribute the out-of-print books, because for most of these out-of-print books, there just wasn't a platform by which they could make them accessible. And then number 3, of course, Google. Okay, and so what we've often described it as was a win-win-win because we really felt like it helped users, it helped authors and publishers, and we found that by working together, our conflict was more about this principle, but actually our interests align. So now I'm going to give a quick overview of the settlement for those people who haven't read the 334 pages. So how many people have not read the 334 pages? Okay. And I should mention right now that many of you probably are class members, okay? And as such, this is about the general benefits. For you, you should go find out your own information. And as I like to say, if you just search on Google Book Settlement on Bing, you should find it, okay? So feel free to go look for it. And you also can download the notice. In fact, the notice for class members is much simpler than the long whole settlement.
Right.
So you should think about doing that. So the way the settlement works is it starts with the concept that rights holders have choice kind of throughout the agreement. And one of the challenges we had in negotiating this was we had, in the negotiations, you had authors and publishers, which for those authors or publishers in the room, we realized that they don't always get along. We had publishers and libraries, and shockingly, they don't always get along.
Yeah.
Okay. And we had Google, okay, who at times, we were under a lawsuit from authors and publishers. So you had these very different groups coming together, trying to find a balance between enabling access, right, and building a platform that met the interests of the rights holders and what they wanted. So in this, one of the tenets of the agreement was rights holder choice. So a rights holder, if they want to do what's called opt-out, that means I'm not part of this lawsuit, it doesn't apply to me, it has nothing to do with me. Okay, they can do that. And just so you know, September 4th is when you need to say opt-out, I don't have anything to do with it.
I want to ask you a question about that. When you say rights holders, these could be books that are in print or out of print.
So that's a good question.
Right.
So what's called the class.
Yes.
Okay. The class, it includes both in print and out of print books.
Right.
It's basically anybody who owns a US copyright interest in a work that was published prior to January 5th, 2009. Okay? It does not include what are called unregistered works, because you need, if you have a US work, you had to register it. It does include international works. It does include authors and publishers, meaning both sides. And with international works, it's included because of Berne and a number of other conventions that say they have a US copyright interest.
Right.
Okay? It doesn't include journals. It doesn't include sheet music. There are other details of what it doesn't include. But it does include both in-print and out-of-print books.
And everything published before 1923 is fair game.
Everything, so anything that is public domain is not covered.
Right, okay.
In the United States, there's a slight nuance by something called twin books, but pretty much 1923 is a date certain. Now, there are many books from 23 to 63 that are actually in the public domain, and those aren't covered. If it's in the public domain, it's not covered.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
So in this, a rights holder, okay, one thing they can do under the settlement is they can what's called remove, which basically says that if they say, Google, I don't want you to scan my book, then we can't scan your book. Okay, and that's a contractual obligation. We've always had a policy, just like on the web, where if a rights holder says, I don't want you to scan my book, we don't scan it. Okay, that's just been a policy, but we've done that as a policy much like we do on the web. Here it becomes an obligation, and if we've already scanned your book, and there's certain windows when this goes away, but if in a certain period of time, if we've already scanned your book and you say remove, then we have to delete it. Okay? Number 3, a rights holder can come and say, I don't want to be part of this program anymore, and they can do that 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. They can stop, say, I don't want you to sell my book, or they can say, I want you to sell my book. And that's completely non-exclusive. They can do that at any point in time. Okay, so there's no kind of lock-in or anything that binds you or restricts a rights holder from doing a deal with anyone else. So under the settlement agreement, the in-print books, what we can do is scan and index, but we are not allowed to show any content from the book unless a rights holder comes forward and authorizes it. Okay, so we can't show the 3 snippets even that we're showing today unless a rights holder says, yes, you can do that. For the out-of-print books, we can scan and index, but what we also do by default is start making certain what are called access uses. And the idea was that most rights holders for out-of-print books are going to want people to access their books. That's why people write books, is actually for people to read the books. Okay? And that for out-of-print books, they didn't have a market for them now, and so they probably going to want access. Okay? Now, any rights holders can come forward and say, no, I don't want you to do that. In other words, maybe this is they have a new book, and this is an older book on a similar topic, and they don't want people to see it, or whatever reason. They don't want Google to do it. You can always come forward and say, no, please don't make these uses. But by default, these uses would be on until someone came forward and said one thing or the other.
So the default is you're in unless you say I'm out.
For the out-of-print.
Right.
For the out-of-print, yes.
Okay.
And the access uses are consumer purchase. This is the idea that you buy access, but it's to the digital book in the cloud. And we'll talk a little more about this. I'll talk a little more about this later, but the idea is it's in the cloud. You can come and get it when you're online 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, whenever. It's in your digital locker. Okay? Preview. The ability to preview up to 20% of the book to say, is this the right book for me? Okay? And then 2 institutional products. The primary one being an institutional subscription that allows universities, public libraries, and all sorts of other institutions to subscribe to the entire corpus so that their members access everything for free. And then there's also an opportunity that if an institution says, no, I don't want to subscribe to this, I don't want the product, I'm going to use the other stuff, they can get at least 1 terminal, for public libraries, 1 terminal per building where they can access it for free. Because the belief was you still wanted, this isn't designed as the solution for public libraries, but it's something that even the smallest library with the most limited resources could still provide this access without any cost to them. So those are the access models. Now the idea is, so for some of these they generate revenue. 63% of the revenue goes to the rights holders. So it's a 63-37 split between the rights holder and Google. Often in book selling, it might be 50-50, or with aggregators, it might even be, in the other direction.
Less.
Yes. And so, we tried to make it where the rights holders were getting the majority of the revenue. The Books Rights Registry is an organization that's formed independent of Google. It has nothing to do with Google. That's designed to represent authors and publishers and class members, okay? And we give them the money. It's their job to identify rights holders, help arbitrate disputes between rights holders, and hold the money for rights holders to the extent a rights holder hasn't come forward, and to fine rights holders in terms of any money that hasn't been claimed, okay?
So now this is an important concept. I mean, it's worth just noting that this new entity called a Book Rights Registry would be formed under this agreement, right? And people who know about the music industry know about ASCAP BMI. People who know about other kinds of intellectual property know about a compulsory license that somebody is given without a negotiation. So this registry is an entirely new creation that was an important part of this settlement agreement, right?
Yep. Yeah, and you provide a couple of analogies which are important to understand the difference. It was an important creation because you needed an organization that then would, this is a 100-year agreement. That's because that's how long copyright lasts,
yeah.
Okay? And you needed, the one thing I've often said is, the one thing I know about what the right business models are is whatever we've decided today are the wrong ones. I don't necessarily know what the right ones are 20 years from now, but I just know these aren't necessarily the right ones 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now.
Right.
And so you need an organization that can be there to represent their interests. There are a number of things in the agreement to try and protect from some of the issues that have occurred in other cases. So
right.
One is it's not compulsory.
Yes.
Anyone can say, no, I don't want you to represent me. In some of these, it's like, no, it's compulsory. It's also non-exclusive, where they can work with anyone else. And finally, and this is one of the most important points, the registry.
The registry has the right to license these rights to other people.
If for anyone that comes forward, if those people want the registry to represent them, then the registry can do that.
Right.
But also, the rights holder can work with the registry and can work with 5 other entities. Sometimes these are exclusive, in other words, so in some cases you have a rights organization that has some exclusive ability to negotiate on behalf, and in this case they don't. And the final part that's really important is the database that's being created, which is the information about what books are claimed and who claimed what books, are stated that it has to be public. So one thing that you run into that's sometimes a problem with rights organizations is they say, I represent a bunch of people, you have to do this. And you say, great, who do you represent? And they go, well, I'm not going to tell you. That's because they don't want other people to know who they represent, because then people might go around them if they want to get out some deal on their own. And it was important that this information be public. So that way, to the extent the registry rights holders, if they want to work directly with Google, they can. They want to work directly with other providers, they can. And the information here is public. So it creates market incentives for the registry to add value to these rights holders because there's other options that they have.
Once everything's digitized. Right.
Even before, it's the information, even aside from whether it's been digitized, the information about who the rights holder is, even if this book hasn't been digitized, could still be used by someone else.
So there's a category of book in all of this that have become known as orphan books. And that phrase and what happens to so-called orphan books is an important part of this agreement. So talk a little bit about what is an orphan book, how does it get treated, what happens to the author, the content, all of that within this agreement.
Within the agreement. And so I'm going to, in terms of the orphan books, and of course, what sometimes has been said, oh no, Google's going to have a monopoly on orphan books, and of course, nobody wants Google to monopolize the poor orphans, because it sounds like a terrible thing, and I don't want to be. What's the woman's name in Orphan Annie that runs the orphanage? I'm blanking on her name. My daughter could tell me. I don't want to be her.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is an important question, and in fact, it ties into this other question of, you know, if you will, there's this word association of Google and monopoly that, you know, creates some apprehension.
Googopoly.
Yes, and in fact, I'm thinking of making that game, but I may get some trouble with other people who may claim they have that word. So in this, what we've done is try to create what I think is a pro-competitive thing, and I mentioned this some, by the fact that the Books Rights Registry, when rights holders come forward, can negotiate with anyone else. It means that second comers are in a much better shape than Google is today, because as books get claimed, it makes it easier for other people, and they don't have to, you know, have a lawsuit. They don't have to, you know, pay all this money. We're paying in the end what's $34 million to help create the registry, get rights holders to come forward, and then this can be used by others. Okay. Now, for unclaimed works, the registry doesn't have the right to negotiate on behalf of rights holders.
So these are the books where there are no rights holders.
Well, not yet. That's what I'm going to get to.
All right,
In fact, it's important that these are the books that up to this point, a rights holder hasn't come forward yet.
I see, okay.
Okay? Now, the reason for this is a class action settlement between a defendant and a class. And our belief is the way class action settlements, that we don't think the class action enables the creation of somebody that can then get into a deal that wasn't you know, involved in this case or controversy. Okay? So they can, once rights holders come forward and authorize them, but we didn't think class action construct allowed this. So what that means is, for unclaimed books, the Books Rights Registry can't go and do other deals. Okay? Now, the orphan books will be a subset of the unclaimed books.
Right, okay.
Okay, because there'll be some books, I mean, right now, I'm sure there are people in this room that are class members who haven't claimed their books yet. Now, we're not offering the services yet, but that doesn't mean they're orphans. Okay, it just means they're not claimed yet. Okay, and in fact, under the settlement, there's no such thing as an orphan per se, because in US copyright law, they don't envision an orphan yet. So the orphans are some subset of the unclaimed books. Okay, and the design is to build a system that helps to find who the rights holder are, to make it easier for everyone. And the fact that these books, access is being made, and money is being held, and there's an organization going and finding rights holders, it both incentivizes people to come forward, because they say, hey, did you see that book you wrote years ago is up there? You should go claim it.
Right.
And it has people trying to find people. And so it creates this positive feedback loop of getting more and more works claimed, so that way other people who have all sorts of ideas can take advantage of it. Now, there's certainly going to be some number that, and let's define what an orphan is now. I think traditionally, different people use it in different ways, but traditionally it's thought of as if you tried to find the rights holder for a book and made a reasonable effort, you know, you couldn't find them. In other words, it would be really hard to find the rights holder. And now, one good thing about books, and there's a lot of more general stuff about orphan works, is in general books, you have a publisher and you have an author's name there. So figuring out who might be the rights holder, you already have a really good hint. Now with photographs and other things, in fact, a lot of the questions of orphan work legislations, libraries will hold a photograph with absolutely nothing on it to give you any idea, and I'm sure actually the Computer History Museum has stuff where you just cannot even begin to figure out who the rights holder might be. Okay? So there's a general problem with orphan works. Okay? In books, the number of orphans I expect to be, you know, small. And in fact, so I think it was the Authors Guild who said that whenever they try to find a rights holder, usually they're successful 90% of the time. Okay? And since, for those who don't know, between 1923 and 1963, if you had a copyright, you had to renew it after 28 years to retain the copyright. And the studies have shown that between 80 and 90% of the works were not renewed. So between 23 and 63, the belief is between 80 to 90% of the works are actually public domain. Okay? From 63 on, many of these books, especially in libraries, are academic authors. They were a professor at Berkeley, they're a professor here, they were, I can find pretty much anyone who went to undergrad with me in 1980. I can probably find most of the people who were professors at my school in 1970. Often the rights are still held by the publisher. Okay, so we think these estimates where somewhere the orphans will be 10% or less are probably in the right ballpark. And under the agreement, it is the fact that if you really can't find a rights holder, then it's difficult, okay, for someone else to take advantage. But it's not because of the agreement. In fact, the agreement is completely non-exclusive. It allows anyone to do exactly the thing we're doing. The problem is that in general, and what we've been consistently saying is that, we believe this content, it's important to make it accessible. And that in fact, one is better than none, but many is better than one. And in fact, what we hope and what we've been out saying is that the more we get people to make use of this, it creates a greater incentive and impetus to get Congress to act on good orphan work legislation, which we've gone to the Hill many times before to argue for it, and we continue to do it. Because we think it's important, because here there are only limited uses, and the orphan work problem extends to all sorts of stuff, okay? So we actually think that by creating the database and making the database public, it solves what has always been one of the biggest challenges in getting orphan work legislation through, which is you're trying to prove a negative, and since nobody has put up the money and make the effort to build a database, then how do you know, what you have to do?
Right.
And so I think that it doesn't solve it completely, but it helps move the ball forward with one of the big challenges, and I think creates a much better environment. And in fact, one thing we've been consistently saying is we encourage those people that are concerned about orphan works to continue to help push for good legislation so that we can have more broad access.
So before we leave this competitive, monopolistic question that's swirling around and go on to another hot topic, which is privacy, let me just pose two very simple or simplified versions of two of the concerns that have been raised about this. One is, as I understand it, for orphan works, maybe even the small percentage, you estimated maybe as small as 10%. For orphan works, under the agreement, is it true that Google receives all of the revenue after the distributions to the other rights holders? Google receives all of the revenue for those books? Because that's one of the competitive issues I've heard. And then more broadly, there's concern by some people who've described it like this, which is it's a restructuring of the publishing industry, which puts Google at the center of that restructuring. However high-minded and publicly spirited Google's intentions might be here. So I want to just address those kind of a lot of revenue going to Google and this whole restructuring issue with Google at the center. Talk about that for a minute.
And so let's start with the first one in terms of a lot of revenue. Now, one of the challenges I always have in this is, I'm very excited, and I believe all this content is hugely important from a societal and social value to let people access it. But at the same time, I have to be a realist about the content, okay? So today, roughly, I think about 97% of the book market is for in-print books. Okay, in terms of the revenue from the book market, it's in-print books, okay? Note, out-of-print books are actually quite accessible. You go to Amazon, they have a rich network of out-of-print books that you can order just as easily as you can order from Amazon, okay? And actually, they usually are pretty darn cheap, okay? In a library, it's just as easy to check out an out-of-print book as an in-print book. They're in the same stacks, they're right next to each other actually, and you just have to pull it down. However, many of these books are being put in high-density storage because of limited demand. So 97% of the money in the book market is in-print books. And for in-print books, this really doesn't give us any advantage over anyone else. And currently, the digital book market is about 1% to 2% of the book market, okay? So when you say, in the out-of-print books, what's the market? Well, now I think there is some untapped potential. I think because of the friction in getting access, you can actually realize more value. Okay, but you're still starting from 1 to 2% of 3%. Okay? Now, even when you break that down in terms of orphans versus claimed, the bulk of the valuable out-of-print books are much more likely to be, you know, the first 2 books that this author that has 3 current in-print books wrote. You know, this book by this seminal professor that eventually went out of print. These things that are very highly likely going to be claimed, or things, for example, with if you take Pearson or Wiley or many of these companies, where the publisher still owns the rights and are claiming these books.
Right.
So when you take the economic potential, the vast majority of it is going to be in claimed works. So now when we get to the orphan works, okay, when you talk about the economic potential, you know, I actually, I sometimes find it, when I talk to people in the publishing industry, they find it humorous because it's like, well, they're orphaned for a reason. And that in fact, if we suddenly found this gold mine where the future of the book are the orphan books,
yeah.
Okay, then boy, those publishers sure aren't very smart. Okay, and so I think we have to temper all of this with a realization that in fact, it's probably the case that the cost to digitize these books is greater than the economic potential, okay? And so the idea that it gives us this leg up to shape the future of the book world, okay, when I think everyone in this room agrees that really the future of the book and how we read the book and how we buy books and how we engage with books are going to be driven by in-print books and books that are yet to be written yet, okay? And so I think it's good that access is being made to this, okay? And what you said, so Google keeps the 37%, just like we do on everything else.
Right.
63% would go to the registry. And so it's not that Google, you know, we can say Google keeps all the money except for the 63%.
Right, and that's the way the argument's being
Right,
made.
but so yes, in the same way that when Penguin publishes Tom Sawyer, right, so we give away the public domain, okay, but other people, you know, there's a cost in providing the service, right? So the fact that you make money off of something that's not copyrighted, I think that's not unusual, or, you know, that is. So, you know, it's still 37%, okay? And what promises, I think, to be a very small pot, okay? And again, our hope would be, and in fact, we put this in the settlement agreement, is that orphan work legislation supersedes the settlement agreement if there's orphan work legislation. So if there's legislation that allows other types of distribution, and in fact, I think what is more likely is that either due to legislation or due to people just looking at the books that haven't been claimed and saying, I'm a not-for-profit, I'm going to take some chances because I don't think there's anyone here to sue me in this old book or that old book or whatever. And you can go and find out that no one's claimed it. Okay, so there may be other people that will be broadly distributing these things for free, and Google won't be able to do that. In fact, the reason we do this with Orphan Works is under the settlement, we don't know what's an orphan work versus what's an unclaimed work, and it was believed for somebody to decide, let's say that we should give away the orphan books, okay, when I don't know what an orphan book is, because for me, any book here, it just hasn't been claimed yet.
Right.
And if a rights holder came forward and we did a settlement that says, hey, we'll decide to give your book away after this many years, that rights holder might say, well, hold on a second. What gives you the right to do that? So we treat all the unclaimed books the same, which I do think is, you know, while it may not be the thing that's in Google's best interest, or, you know, we might have done other things, I do think it's the right thing for rights holders that in this settlement you should be treating all of them the same.
So, questions?
One or two?
Boy, do we have questions. So, I'm going to ask you one final question of my own about the privacy issue, and I'm sure it's going to be covered in here, but let me just ask this. So, about 2 weeks ago, Eric Schmidt got a letter from the ACLU of Northern California, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and the Samuelson Clinic at Berkeley. This is a quote. It's nothing, you've already responded to it, I think, on your blog, but let me just read the quote. This is on the privacy issue. Under its current design, Google Book Search keeps track of what books readers search for and browse, what books they read, and even what they write down in the margins. Given the long and troubling history of government and third-party efforts to compel libraries and booksellers to turn over records about readers, it is essential that Google Books incorporate strong privacy protections in both the architecture and policies of Google Book Search. Without these, Google Books could become a one-stop shop for government and civil litigant fishing expeditions into the private lives of Americans. So there's the real 800-pound gorilla in the privacy area. And what's Google's position on that?
Yeah, so first of all, we don't disagree about the importance of privacy here. And in fact, I'm going to talk in a second about some of the things we've come out and talked about with respect to privacy. But one thing, to just again put this in perspective, I think there is this question of privacy as we go towards consuming more and more content digitally and online, okay? I don't think your usage of out-of-print books is really where the biggest of the issues are, okay? That as we start talking about a digital future, it's predominantly, I mean, we access all sorts of information online, through various websites, and we buy books through lots of different folks, and so there's all sorts of stuff that what I think this is doing is trying to put a spotlight on what is an issue that I think should be discussed, is in a digital world of the future where we consume content online, what are the important protections that people need for privacy? And this isn't so much, it's about all the out-of-print books, it's about the broader spectrum.
So just as a fundamental technical question though, is this correct in saying that Google, the book search capability, has the ability to capture this information?
Yeah, so no, in fact, this is where I was going to go to the concrete answer. So I'm going to go through a few of the things that we've kind of said publicly. First of all, we don't require you to log in to use most of what is book search. So you don't have to log in if you want to use preview. So people understand the concept of a Google account, okay? And that's how we kind of know who you are, is we have your Google account because you have an email or whatever. And we don't log that when you're doing preview. We don't require that when you're searching, anything like that. And we don't associate your Google account with your activity in terms of your searches, your preview, anything. With respect to the institutional subscription, which is something that's very important, we've stated that we will be conforming to what has become really standard practice in the industry. I mean, libraries, the licensing of digital products, this isn't the first digital product for libraries to license, and it's always been very important to them about this. So we're going to be using what's called IP authentication or other systems. There's a system called Shibboleth or other ways where Google doesn't require students to log in to Google, and so we don't know who this person is that's using the content, okay? And same thing with our public access terminals. That's just a terminal. You walk up, you sit there and you use it. I have no idea who you are. You're I can't even tell when one person stands up and another person sits down. Okay, so this importance of libraries, to use the analogy right now, anyone can go into a library, take a book off a stack, sit in the library all day, read it, put it back on the stack, and nobody knew that they did this. And the same thing will be true when you go into a library and go up to a terminal and use Google Book Search and the services there. It is the fact that when you purchase a book, okay, I need to have some way to make sure, because it is storing the information in the cloud so that you can come back and get it, you need to have some way to come back and get it, right? Because we did not get authorization for a download where you store it on your computer. And this is a general issue with, I would call, cloud-based models, okay, because you have to have a login. Now, within Google, we're going to build it so that you should be able to separate, your kind of login from, like the information that is your credit card and other things. So we're trying to think of how to make sure that it's just, sort of some username and some password. And so, we've been spending a lot of time talking to these organizations and talking to American Library Association, ARL, many other organizations. And with privacy, one of the challenges in developing the right privacy policy is engaging with the community and then also technically designing your product. Because if I don't know the product that I'm offering you, it's tough to describe exactly what the right services and features and privacy are. So, you know, we're working to design this product. We don't have it all designed yet. And that's why we've come out with a few clear things to sort of tell people that we also think this is an important issue. We're going to make some commitments now, and then we're going to keep working on designing the product and continue to make commitments going forward. And in particular, you know, we're kind of conforming to many of the things that have already kind of become standard in the industry.
In the way Google operates.
But not just Google, no, in the way libraries operate.
Right.
So like when we license, you know, we're going to have to do the same things that every company that licenses to libraries today do, and take advantage of some of the approaches that have already been developed.
So let me start with some questions here that are not, I don't think anything you've said has directly addressed some of these points. So first question is, what are the odds that a Google competitor could negotiate a similar settlement with authors and publishers? How do we ensure Google has competition in this area?
Yeah. In terms of what are the odds that they can negotiate a similar, right? The question is similar and what is a competitor going to do? So in fact, we start with the claimed books, and you know, the books rights registry, I think, and they've made statements about their intentions. They have every incentive to work with other providers. That's because everywhere you look in publishing, rights holders' interests are maximized by going through multiple distribution channels. Nobody says, I only want my book sold at Borders. Please don't put it in Barnes & Noble.
Right.
Okay? Because that's, so the registry is going to be aggressively trying to work with other providers. Okay? Now, for the unclaimed books, if somebody, you know, is scanning and they get sued by a class action lawsuit, okay, then they can go through, you know, the same process. You know, I will say in terms of the, as we talk about competition, I think there is already tons of competition, because when you think of competition, I think you need to start with the book market, okay? And actually the information market. So in fact, many people go online to get all sorts of information, okay? Most books people are going to want, first of all, a lot of people are going to want physical books, and most books they're going to want are going to be in print and newer books, okay? And then secondarily, the books that are going to be claimed that are out of print, right? The unclaimed. So the vast majority of where the demand is, probably 99.99% of demand, anyone's going to get that. In fact, many of the people are light years ahead of us. As I like to say is, can people, you know, in this room guess Google's gross revenues from selling books today? Okay, can anyone guess Amazon's gross revenue from selling books today? Okay, or Barnes & Noble, or Borders, or any of these players. So I think the idea that, you know, suddenly the book industry is going to change, where we have some dominant position, you know, either they think I'm exceptionally smart, and I mean exceptionally, or I think you're just not looking at what, you know, the reality of the industry is. So I think that, you know, the idea that people won't be able to enter isn't true. So
this is a pretty good follow-up then to that question, because it says, and you haven't confined it to this, but it says in defending its settlement with authors and publishers, Google has said it was the only one attempting to digitize works deep in library stacks. But what about the Internet Archive, which I'm sure you know. In fact, Brewster Kale may even be here tonight. Are you here, Brewster? Brewster said he was going to come. He may not be here. Anyway, someone has asked Brewster's question, which is, they said they would leap at an opportunity to have the rights to Orphan Works. Why not urge Congress to give more organizations than just Google these rights?
Well, in fact, the question goes to actually exactly the answer. In fact, we have urged Congress. In fact, one thing we like to say is if people spend, you know, there are certainly those people who've been working saying, you know, concerned about the settlement, and some of them private entities and private corporate entities that have not spent anywhere near the effort we have in lobbying Congress. And if people spent 1/4 of the effort lobbying Congress for Orphan Works as they spent trying to worry about the settlement, we would have long gone and solved it. So in fact, we are lobbying Congress. We've told people that anyone who wants to go with us to lobby Congress, we're there with them, okay? And that in this, I mean, one of the things when we say other folks, previously when Brewster started Open Content Alliance, the big point he made was that they weren't scanning in copyright like Google.
Right.
Okay, and that we weren't going to scan in copyright, not like Google. We're not going to do that, okay, where Google was believing it was fair use. Now, since then, I've heard them, I don't know if they were planning this before we came out with the settlement. They've talked about some plan of loaning books, which I actually, to be honest, I've never gotten that explained to me. So I don't know if they actually have scanned any in copyright stuff or not. I don't know. I know previously they were saying they weren't going to do it. But so in terms of, I can't tell you about whether or not they are actually scanning in copyright today or not.
So it seems like the big overarching question on these competitive issues is, if anyone else wanted to get into this business, they've really got three alternatives. One is legislation. One is a commercial alternative, a set of negotiations, a competing service. And the third is a lawsuit. That's pretty much how the three avenues into the market tend to break down. Legislation is difficult. Washington really hates to deal with these questions. They're esoteric, they involve intellectual property, they're tough issues. The lawsuit route is already occupied. I mean, it would take another lawsuit at some point to do something about this. And the third, the commercial alternative, is going to be difficult, it would seem, to a lot of people, because it would be very difficult to do what Google's doing, to digitize all of these works. So you can see, and you started to respond to this, how some people believe this restructuring argument really 10 or 20 years down the line may prove to be may prove to be accurate.
So let's go to the what I think are the inconsistencies. It's inconsistent to say there is significant economic potential, and then to simultaneously say, but someone else wouldn't spend all the money you're spending. Okay?
Yeah.
That somewhere those two things don't match up.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, it may be that there isn't significant economic potential, and so therefore nobody will spend the money that we're spending, and then we should be glad that Google decided to spend the money. Okay? Or there may be that, you know, suddenly we're on to this wonder of the future of the book, in which case there'll be all sorts of competitors, because previously, and I'm going to use this to talk a little bit, because one thing that's important as we look at this is and this is one thing that, in fact, if you look at like ALA's brief, American Library Association's, CDT's brief, many of the other people have come out and talked about this, they've highlighted this, that you need to evaluate the alternative. It's always great to think of some hypothetical world, but I think, you know, one thing I've often said is, if I'm sitting talking to someone who thinks the world is better if none of this stuff is accessible, then, you know, we're talking about creationisms and evolution because we just fundamentally disagree about something, so no need to keep arguing, okay? I believe everyone in this room agrees the importance of providing access, okay? And the problem we were faced with today, and we would be faced with if the settlement didn't go through, and anybody else would be faced with, that people aren't faced with as the settlement, you know, occurs, is previously books went out of print because the cost of manufacturing and distribution exceeded the economic potential of that book. Okay, publishers, let's assume publishers know their business, and sometimes they make a mistake, but in general that's what happened. Now, in a digital world, the cost of distribution, once you have the content, actually goes close to zero. The marginal cost for each additional distribution is pretty close to zero. So now you have an opportunity. The problem is that historically, since this did not have a positive value deemed in an economic sense, is keeping track of the rights, people didn't spend a ton of time doing it. So what's happened today is the cost of negotiations to resolve exactly who owns the rights, it's not the Orphan Works. It's that for many of these works, and it really comes in two types of ways, that the cost of kind of figuring out do you own the rights is greater than the economic value, even though it may not be greater than what I'll call the societal value, the benefit to society aside from the economics. So usually with contracts with publishers, the way the contracts work, not always, but many of them are written, where if the book goes out of print, the author can send a letter of reversion rights, which is basically saying now the right reverts back to the author. Now there's some contracts that aren't like this, but this is, many contracts are like this. Now, if you ask authors, so in fact, again, how many authors in this room have out-of-print books? Okay, how many authors in this room know conclusively who owns the rights to their out-of-print books? Okay, most say when I go to someone, they go, oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Or they'll come to me and say, Dan, I've got an out-of-print book. You scanned it. Can I let you open it all the way up? And I say, sure, do you have the rights? All you have to do is sign this that says you have the rights. And they go, oh, I don't know if I have the rights. And they say, no, I'm not going to sign something that has the potential of statutory damages under copyright law. Because if somebody does that and they don't have the rights, they are potentially at risk under copyright laws for statutory damages can be, let's just say, up to $30,000 in this case. And you're trying to give your book away, so you're like, I'm not going to risk that. And you go to publishers, and publishers will say, I'm pretty sure I own the rights to this. In fact, out of these 1,000 books, I'm positive I own the rights to 990 of them.
Yeah.
I just don't know which 990 of them.
Yeah.
Okay? And they'll say the value of each of these books is very small. Okay? And so, is it worth my time to take a risk of statutory damages if I screw up? Okay? No. Okay? And the other part about this is what's called digital rights. That in fact, prior to, let's say, roughly 1990, most contracts didn't envision digital rights. And there's an ongoing dispute where authors think they still hold the digital rights, and publishers say, no, we hold the digital rights. And while there's been one case about it, in general, they've agreed to sort of disagree and just let these things lie dormant. Except for books like Grapes of Wrath or any popular book, they go and fight over it and they decide how to split it and you can get it. But for all these other books, it's like, it's not worth our time. So what happens, because we actually had gone to publishers and talked to them about their out-of-print books and do they want to open them up, and some of them they're like, okay, and some of them are like, you know what, Dan? It's not worth my time to go and figure this out, okay? And because it's just not, and so the problem we were having, and we still have if not for this, is individually it's not worth anyone's time. And what's happening in the settlement is what is a negotiated agreement, which is between authors and publishers as much, which if an author and publisher are comfortable with it, then it works. If either of them don't want it, they can say, no, I don't want it, and then the book doesn't get displayed, it doesn't get used, okay? Most are just gonna say, great, let this go, okay? And so not only will it let Google make uses, but it'll let other people that come to the registry make these uses. And I think, so as we look at this, when you talk about the alternatives,
right.
Okay, the first thing you have to do is think of what world do I prefer, right? The world we're in now and where that would potentially go. And now when you talk about the alternative world, my contention is, and in fact, I think what will almost certainly happen, is for the out-of-print books where there's demand, I think with almost absolute certainty, Amazon and other providers are going to come in and get a deal and digitize them. Okay, they're smart. They'll wait to see what books people buy from Google. They'll let us kind of do everything, and then they'll say, well, let us do the ones that actually there's demand for. And there'll be lots of people competing. Maybe they'll go ahead and do everything, where they can get the rights from the registry. Maybe not, okay? But I actually think that there will be people doing deals and at least digitizing some of the books and maybe all of them. And so I think the doing deals works. I also think the likelihood of a congressional solution is actually much better because of the creation of the database, the creation of the registry, okay, and this sense that says, hey, this was a good idea. What you find is, as more people use this stuff, it's going to make it much easier for someone to articulate and Congress to feel the importance of acting to provide more general solutions if we take something like Orphan Works. Okay, and so I actually think this helps, and I'm actually very optimistic that those things can happen.
So we promised tonight we would also talk a little bit about the international implications of this. We have several questions about that. Let me just say, this one is a pretty good summary, I think, of some of the issues. It says the European Commission is going to have a hearing about the settlement 3 days after the deadline for copyright holders to opt out of the US class. Can you explain what European regulators are concerned about, and is Google invited to the hearing?
Yeah. So they did notify us about, would you like to come? I don't know. I actually don't know the details. I know it existing on the 7th, and in terms of the schedule, that's still being kind of discussed to figure out. There are, within Europe, okay, and in fact, it wasn't by chance that they did this afterwards. Part of it is trying to engage in a discussion, right, more broadly. It's not just about what's happening in the US courts, okay? And within Europe, I think there are 3 different issues that come up. And we've talked to lots of people in Europe, and lots of people in Europe are actually quite comfortable. Some have concerns. One concern that comes up is they fundamentally think, and this absolutely happens in Germany, which has been probably a lot of the discord has been in Germany. They think we never should have been scanning books.
At all.
At all. And that in fact, nobody should settle with this because we were blatantly breaking the law, okay, and that we should be punished, okay? And at some level, that issue we can never get over because we have a disagreement about US copyright law. And in fact, one of the challenges was, in fact, one of the people that's been pushing this in Germany actually was someone who was involved in a lawsuit in Germany that got withdrawn, okay? So that's one of the challenges we face, and there's nothing over that, okay? Another challenge we face, which we've kind of cleared up with many of them, but there's still some confusion, is that the concept of in-print or commercial availability includes books that are in print in Europe, but not in the US, okay, which was one of the concerns people had. The third concern that sometimes is there is it's this thing where we can't make any uses within Europe, right? A US court, just so you understand, we're getting authorization for making uses only within the United States because a US court can't grant any authorization to make any uses internationally. So at some level, the benefiting people in Europe doesn't get the benefits of the agreement.
Right.
And part of the questions people ask is, well, what about Europe, right? And the simple answer there is, I do believe that many, many rights holders will come forward. And as they come forward, then they can authorize uses internationally. Okay, if they deem appropriate, they can work directly with Google to do that. So we're trying to figure out ways to extend some of these services to Europe because we think we're an international company. But that's where some of the issues are, and I think actually the discussion on the 7th will be healthy because I've been over there a couple times. We've talked to a number of organizations, and I think as we have more discourse, actually, people feel more comfortable, especially when they understand what are the opportunities for use within Europe.
Okay. So there's some technical questions here about just how Google goes about this. One is, please elaborate on the actual technique behind the book scanning process. 10 million books is a lot of books. So how does Google scan 10 million books in?
Okay, so does everybody have a couple hours?
Can you say it briefly?
Yes, I can. We developed our own scanner because we looked at existing technologies and they couldn't scale to the task. So we spent a lot of time developing our own scanner. And what I'll briefly do is describe how we approach scanning and the way we look at scanning a little differently from the way it had previously been looked at. And the analogy I like to use is probably most people in here are familiar with what's called progressive Jpeg. Or if you will, it used to be a Jpeg image, you'd see one line, then another line, then another line, and it would take quite a while till you saw the whole picture nice and clean. And of course, progressive Jpeg is you see the whole picture, it's a little blurry, it gets sharper, it gets sharper, it gets sharper. So previously in scanning, what they were doing was you would spend a lot of money on each book because you had limited money, and you would only get, if the box, the whole thing was all the world's books in optimal resolution and all, you'd be moving very, very slowly, okay, across this way and then this way. And the approach we've taken is what you want to do is be able to do this at scale, be able to detect when a human error occurs. We do have humans turning pages, okay? Detect if an error occurs, and then find a way to fix it, okay? And we have fairly sophisticated software that does what's called dewarping and cleaning, so it comes whiter and black on white and all sorts of stuff. And our software keeps getting better. So part of our strategy is, and in fact many people, well, a number of people have written about our scanning, what they've noticed is actually our quality keeps getting better even on stuff we scanned 3 years ago. That's because we keep rerunning our software as our software gets smarter. And we also have scanned books multiple times to handle the fact that a person might have missed a page or had a bad page. And we got smarter about which page to take. And we also are going to be taking feedback from users. And then if we have a bad page again, we can go scan that page. So the way to think of it is, over time, in this box, we quickly get all this information that otherwise isn't accessible, okay? Most of the books are actually in very good shape, but there's some probability of any individual book having a problem. And then how can we, over time, remove those problems, especially for those books that people are actually seeing? Because in fact, if nobody ever looks at a page and it has a blur, and for the next 10 years nobody looks at it, I guess nobody hears the tree falling in the forest, okay? And so this is part of our strategy, and it is a very ambitious task, and we have, a number of engineers still working on it today.
So once you've scanned all these books, how many scanned books will be enough?
How hungry are we?
Yeah, and how will you know? At what point does Google make a judgment that we've scanned just about everything?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So figuring out when enough is enough, we haven't figured that out yet because we're not close, okay? In US libraries, the estimate is there are over 40 million books, okay? We have 31 partners in the US, 42 partners worldwide, and worldwide there are even more books. We're only scanning in copyright within the US, okay? And we're very open to adding more partners. So people ask, how many books will we scan? I can't tell you because I don't know exactly how many we'll put our hands on. It's probably 40, 50 million or something like that. And figuring out when we've gotten the last one in and of itself will be a very tricky problem, and I don't know how to solve that. Luckily, I've got a few years to work on that.
So we've just seen recently, it says here, the dark side of digital books, which was the retrieval of the Orwell books from the Kindle platform.
Yes. Yes.
So how would you, what are your thoughts about that? How would you comment on that in the context of all of this?
And one thing that, if you don't mind, I'm going to take that also to talk a little bit about our vision kind of for the future of how people might buy electronic books, because I think that ties into that. So this is a challenge that exists in a cloud-based model, and I think in some way it's healthy that it occurred, because it got people talking about something that otherwise they wouldn't have, okay? Now in the settlement agreement, we actually worked to make it very clear that once we sell a book, we can keep letting people access that book. A rights holder can come forward and say, I don't want anyone else to be able to buy it, but we have the rights to keep making copies for anyone that had previously bought it. Okay, so we solved that problem in the settlement, okay, which was an important thing. In fact, we thought about, we need to make sure this is the case. You need to trust that something's in the cloud. One thing that you need to make sure as you go forward is, as we sell something, to make sure that we have the rights to keep making copies. And in 1984, the challenge was that, somebody, whether it was Amazon or someone else, I think for those who don't know, the problem was it was put in and sold for 99 cents from a publisher who characterized it as a public domain book. It's a public domain book in Australia, but not in the US, okay? And so in fact, the sale and the copies weren't authorized. And now it might have been that Amazon could have figured out a better way to handle it, okay?
And I think Jeff Bezos has said that.
Yes, but it is the fact that, in a cloud-based world, there's some challenges here. So let me talk a little bit about our model for, if you will, the future of electronic books, okay, and what Google's doing. Because one of the problems we've run into is people look at the settlement and think that that is Google's vision for what the future looks like for books. And in fact, the settlement is what we figured out predominantly for these out-of-print books. So it's about more the past. And in fact, since we've done a lot of thinking of what is the role we want to play going forward in a digital book world, for new books, for in-print books, for future books. And there are a few things that we kind of put as kind of requirements that I kind of said, I think our design has to support this. So one is, I believe people want their books stored in the cloud. So by that, all of us probably store some music on our hard drive in MP3s, okay? And we spend time making sure that if I get a new computer, I copy all the files and I don't lose them and all that. And it's kind of a pain in the ass, but we do it, okay? And most of us do it. There isn't really a cloud-based solution to music, and one reason is because we already had all these CDs, and you can't upload CDs to the cloud. You can rip them onto your hard drive. And then, of course, there are lots of kids who pirated music, which you can't upload to the cloud.
Right.
And so, but with music, I use my old music every day. So I use the analogy of, think of your CD shelf and how many times you went and picked a CD off your CD shelf and set it next to your stereo versus how many times you went and grabbed a book off your bookshelf and set it next. And the answer is, I think for most people, your library is something that you don't pull the books off all that often. But when you need it, you want it to be there, okay? And that's where a cloud really works, because you're not going to actively manage it, but you want to make sure that 5 years from now when you say, oh, I want that book, and that's particularly true for science, professional, technical, all these books that I think many people in this crowd probably own, that you spend a lot of money, you want to make sure it's there. So first of all, it needs to be cloud-based. Number two, I think it's critical that there's diversity of choice in terms of retailers that you work with. Now, one of the aspects of a cloud is a consumer needs to trust that the person who's providing the cloud will be there tomorrow. So you don't trust a cloud for some new startup that you've never heard of, or some small local bookstore that you love to go to, because just because they build a cloud, you don't know that it'll still be there and your book will be there in 20 years. Okay? But I think it's, right now, the physical bookstores is a critical part of our book ecosystem. And in fact, a huge amount of books are bought because people go into a physical bookstore and browse and say, hey, I want this, hey, I want that. And I think it's a mistake if we think of our future digital world is where digital means online and physical means offline. Because if that happens and 10% of the world goes digital, that's going to be really hard for all the bookstores to sustain the business model they're in. So part of our model is to figure out, we're going to syndicate for our partner program all the books we sell that are new, so that any bookstore can sell a Google edition, okay? And figure out a way that people can buy them in bricks and mortar stores as well, okay? And then finally, our model is you should be able to read it on any device, okay? So we want to work so that you can get lots of different devices, and some of them may be dedicated e-readers. Some of them will be general purpose devices. Our model is some people will read on their laptop, some people will read on their phone, some people will read on their netbook, and some people will read on their e-reader, okay? And we'll work with any e-reader provider that wants to make it so that they have an e-reader, they can get their books from the cloud, from the Google Cloud. And it shouldn't be that there's a coupling between your e-reader and the cloud where you store your books, okay? So you should be able to have a Sony e-reader today and then some other e-reader tomorrow, or you may decide you don't want an e-reader, you're using a netbook. So the sort of principles of our future world is trying to build this world where lots of retail players read on any device, but it's still stored in the cloud. And as we've talked with publishers and as we've talked with booksellers, I think this is sort of the right model, because we're trying to make what would be an open model that encourages competition.
So I'm going to give the last question to a very dedicated volunteer here at the museum who sent me this by email earlier today, and then I'm going to ask Ed to come wrap up. So we have a very beloved volunteer here at the museum named Harry Sello, And Harry was one of the early employees at Shockley Semiconductor, way back when. And one day, William Shockley came in and asked him, he was working on a thing called a diffusion furnace. And Shockley came in and said, you know, I'm impressed with your approach, and do you really understand all the thermal and mechanical things that are involved in this? And Harry said he did. And so a few minutes later, Shockley came back with a copy of his book, and he gave it to Harry, and he'd signed it on the title page, "To the man with the big red hot idea, William Shockley, 26 March, 1957. So in a world of digital books, here we are 50 years later, the invention of the transistor and the semiconductor. What does Shockley endorse to Harry Sello, and how is that captured by Google Books and put in the cloud?
That's a good question, and I will say it's the first time I've gotten that question, believe it or not. That is a tough one. So, first of all, I'll say I personally believe, and 50 years is a ways out. I actually think physical books have a long, one thing that we always have to be cautious of is, as we talk of revolutions, we always make these simple analogies. Oh, look what happened in music. Well, this is gonna, and books are very different. They have very different usage patterns. So I don't know if, the physical book, what that is 50 years from now, but I think, I think 30 years from now, 20 years from now, it'll still be signing the physical book, because I do think there's something about, and this is going to actually the cloud thing, in other words, that, for those books that I want, and I want to have the physical book, to make sure it's there, I'm probably going to buy the physical book. In fact, one thing I would love is the ability to buy both, a reduced price, so I have the physical one, I have the digital one. So I think he may still be signing the physical book. However, in a digital book, that's a tricky question, because one of the aspects of a physical book is what some people have said, one reason we like physical books is it's a souvenir. It's a souvenir for the emotions, and one reason we keep the novels we've read is because I can look up on that shelf and say, oh, I remember when I read that book, and I feel the feelings that I had from reading that book, and there's a physical attachment to the embodiment in that book, okay? And here you give another example where somebody signs this, and the physical book is a souvenir, and I don't think the digital book has nearly the souvenir, the sentimental part of it is this signing and this here's yours, and there's a physical and emotive aspect to it.
Right.
That, at least for me, I don't have that same feeling towards digital books. Or even, I use the example, I says, how often will someone give someone a digital book for Christmas? Okay? It's the same price. This person has the Kindle, but I can't see buying a digital book for my dad for Christmas and having it wrapped up with a card or whatever it is. I just can't, right? I mean, I think I would give the physical book to Dad for Christmas. And so I think that those things, these things that are more, interpersonal, emotive, that thing, I don't think things transfer the same in a digital world.
Yeah.
And so I think he won't be signing the book, he'll be signing something else. Right?
So Ed Feigenbaum, who thinks very deeply about these issues, is going to come up here and wrap up. Let me just say, Ed, before you get started, we are well aware that there are many, many more questions here tonight than we were able to get to in this session. So Dan has very graciously agreed to stick around for some coffee and dessert. We'll be doing that downstairs. He wants to have a much more interactive and open discussion. If you'd like to stick around and do that with him, we're just really grateful to you for your time, for answering all these difficult questions in detail, and for being here tonight. So thank you, and we'll see you outside in a minute, and now I'll turn it over to Ed.
Okay. And thank you, John. It's been good.
I'm very glad that John told you about the dessert and coffee downstairs, because that was one of my jobs. And I want to thank Dan very much for his discussion tonight, and we're going to give him literally a souvenir of your visit here. But before I do that, I just want to say that I really do know what you ought to give your dad for Christmas. If he's like me, about my age, If you actually wrapped up a Kindle and gave it to him, then he could change the typeface to large and bold. Anyway, we have a souvenir. It's a Computer History Museum souvenir called Core Memory. Those of you who are new to the Computer History Museum ought to go down to the gift shop if it's open and buy it. And it is a physical book, ink on paper.
It's not signed. It's not signed.
You ought to get John.
Yeah.
There you go, John.
Yeah.
You need to sign it.
Who is the rights holder on that? Let's
Okay.
see.
I don't know. You're the CEO, so I don't know. It says from here. So.
Right, okay, good.
Well, thank you, Dan.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. It was a great
Good.
stuff.
Yeah.